Well, greetings, everybody. Michael Lodahl here, and actually getting close to feeling like myself again. Just thought I'd give you that update. Well, it's been a journey, and I'm under no illusion that you just couldn't wait to get this video from me for the week, but it is something that we've been encouraged to try to do each week, and earlier this week it's just been too difficult. And I'm really excited about next week, though. I just got to tell you, I think it's really shaping up as a terrific week together. That's at least the way I anticipate it. Really looking forward to some rich conversations with Dr. Shelly Rambo. And we will spend considerable time even before she gets with us. And she'll be with us Wednesday afternoon and all day Thursday. But we'll spend some time in the Gospel of John prior to her arrival. I just want to go over a couple things in the chapter that you're reading this week. There's just so much here that we could touch on. One thing that we'll definitely want to talk about is her interest in, we'll say, the category of spirit, and her rather strong insistence, if that's not putting it too strongly, on when Jesus breathes on the disciples. It is true that in the Greek it says basically receive Holy Spirit, or pneuma, holy breath. There is no definite article there. I did not know this. The definite article would make it receive the Holy Spirit. I'm not quite willing to surrender the idea that what we encounter there in John 20 is, I would say, essentially the Johannine version of Pentecost. We can unpack that more later. That, in other words, what Jesus breathes on his disciples is really what we mean by the Holy Spirit. I know that Rambo, for whom I have a great deal of respect and admiration as a theologian and as a person, is interested in exploring, not just in this book, but in subsequent thinking. I know this from a conversation we had earlier this spring on sort of the category, you might say, of spirit more generally. I'm not opposed to this, but I do want to enter into a kind of conversation where we think about what's entailed in language of spirit in relationship to the much more, we'll say, specific language of the Holy Spirit in Christian tradition, particularly when that's tied, of course, as she mentions, and rightfully so, to the doctrine of the Trinity. I like some of what she's pushing, but I also am going to try to sound some warning about it, but with great respect and admiration. So she does a little bit of that in this chapter, and we will definitely want to talk about that. Another thing that I know I've talked with her a little bit about, and had forgotten that she does touch on it slightly in this chapter, is that after that, however you understand the receive holy breath or the receive the Holy Spirit, Jesus talks about whatever sins you retain on earth, they are retained. Whatever sins you remit or forgive are forgiven. Very strong language. Often, particularly we Protestants aren't sure what to do with this language. And when Rambo was at Point Loma several years ago as our annual Wiley lecturer, she talked on these themes on John chapter 20, and did not want to go to this whole idea of forgiveness or even lack of forgiveness that John 20 seems to imply. very fascinatingly. We had just come through as a campus, something of which some of you may know. It's been a few years ago now, but we had a very, very painful stretch of time that had to do with basically abusive behaviors by one of our professors. In fact, a professor in the School of Theology who's no longer with us, and rightfully so. But this had a lot to do with issues of touch. So what she had to say about Thomas and touch when she was with us had some additional nuance that I would call profoundly pastoral nuance that is not part of this written text. And also the issue of forgiveness. I think she feared that too often in the church we go too speedily to forgiveness and counsel people to forgive who have been victimized, damaged, traumatized. And actually, I'm of the opinion that John 20, along with its rough parallel in the Gospel of Matthew about when one is offended by another, I believe that's in Matthew 18, you're probably familiar. Neither of these passages counsel us toward a quick, easy, or glib forgiveness. Not the Christian Band-Aid approach that Rambo so rightfully is leery about. And so I hope that we'll be able to talk about this further as well, and maybe and involve her in that conversation. The stuff on the distinction between spirit or receive a Holy Spirit and receive the Holy Spirit, she addresses starting on pages 82, maybe through 84. Some really interesting stuff there. I want to make sure that those are. There's also on 90 and 91. I'm going to suggest that maybe her interest in moving toward a more, we'll say, a vague or less defined notion of spirit can also create some difficulties for her theologically, where she says on 91, he, that is Jesus, gives form to that spirit. I think precisely as one who breathes that spirit. He gives form to that spirit, displaying that it is tied to his marked body. But the forms that it will take, and the it here would be the spirit, the forms that the spirit will take upon release, that is release, I think, out of Jesus breathing, are yet to be determined. The forms that it will take are yet to be determined. I would love to hear her talk about that further, and I probably will press her on this. I actually think that one of the things that we could have a lot of fun exploring next week will be what I take are some of the really fascinating dynamics that I believe occurred in what we call the Johannine community over precisely this kind of issue. When we read in 1 John about a split that has occurred in that community, you might remember the language of 1 John where it says something like, they have gone out from us. This will sound familiar. They've gone out from us, but of course they were never really a part of us, or they wouldn't have left us to begin with. And the they are clearly people who are quite enamored with the category of spirit, and maybe even with Holy Spirit, but who are interested in divorcing their fascination with spirit and probably with spiritual experience, divorcing it from the person of Jesus. We'll look at this in more detail next week, but it's right there in 1 John when we often read the line, test the spirits to see that whether they are of God, and we'll quote that line without actually reading, a little further where the criterion actually is given for what it would even mean to test the spirits, which has to do essentially with having some kind of criterion of judgment for what people claim, who come as preachers or prophets or what in those days were called mouthpieces of the Holy Spirit, or people who claim to be a mouthpiece of the Holy Spirit. And First John says, any spirit that does not confess that Jesus Christ has come in the flesh is not from God. Now, we'll be able to unpack that further. But the point would be that the criterion for discerning the presence of the authentic divine spirit, according to First John, is whether or not the person making claims about spirit or spiritual experience or spiritual communication or prophecy or any such thing, whether or not they are willing and in fact able to consciously and closely link their claims and their experiences to the flesh, the true flesh and history of Jesus of Nazareth. I think this actually became a great point of contention in the Johannine community. If we are fortunate, maybe we can even follow down next week for an hour or two with my pet theory that the folks who went out from the Johannine community are at least part of what became the Gospel of Thomas community. And some of you are familiar with the Gospel of Thomas as one of our earliest Gnostic Gospels. And so I think we could have a lot of fun doing some John Wesley, who also makes no comments about the wounds of Jesus in his appearance. Fascinating. Just skips right over that. Where Calvin, sort of roundly denied their significance, Wesley just offers literally no comment. So we'll have fun talking about that. But Wesley, Calvin, Rambo, we'll start off with Romans 8 on Monday afternoon. I'm already excited about that. And but then we'll really delve deeply into the Johannine material. We have great guests coming next week. I'm truly excited about it, and thankfully feeling so much better. Thank you for your prayers. And no need to respond to this. No, there is. Actually, there is. What I'd like is just a quick word back that you watched it all the way through. Give me one sentence or two feedback, and we'll make this a 10-point response assignment. Thanks so much.